Hold up. What are you doing back here?
I'm in my own backyard.
Oh, really? Then prove it. Show me some ID.
Listen closely. I am Judge Marcus Holloway.
Don't talk back. Move your hands where I can see them.
You have no right to intimidate me on my property.
It was a quiet afternoon in an otherwise uneventful neighborhood. The kind of place where nothing ever really happened, where weekends passed with the sound of lawnmowers, sprinklers clicking on and off, and neighbors barely noticing one another. In the back of one well-kept home, a man stood calmly near the fence line, tending to his yard like he had done countless times before. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't doing anything unusual. He wore casual clothes, comfortable and worn, the kind you put on when you're at home and don't expect company. His attention was on the ground in front of him, on the plants he had spent years nurturing. Everything about the moment was ordinary, until it suddenly wasn't. A sharp voice cut through the calm. "Hold up. What are you doing back here?" The man turned slowly, startled not by the words, but by where they came from. Standing just a few steps away, inside the boundaries of his property, was a police officer. No knock, no announcement, no explanation for why he was there. The man frowned, genuinely confused. "I'm in my own backyard," he replied, keeping his voice steady. The officer didn't relax. In fact, his posture stiffened. His eyes moved quickly over the man, lingering longer than necessary, as if something didn't add up in his mind. "Oh, really?" the officer said. "Then prove it. Show me some ID." The man took a slow breath. He had dealt with tense situations before, many of them far worse than this. Still, the disbelief crept in. He hadn't done anything wrong. He was standing on property he legally owned. Yet here he was, being challenged like an intruder. "Listen closely," the man said, calm but firm. "I am Judge Marcus Holloway." The officer's expression hardened rather than softened. "Don't talk back," he snapped. "Move your hands where I can see them." The command echoed with authority, but also with something else: assumption, suspicion, a conclusion already reached. "You have no right to intimidate me on my own property," the man responded, his hands visible, his tone controlled. What the officer didn't seem to realize, what he would soon regret, was that this encounter was being documented in real time. Every word, every movement, every choice he made from this moment forward would follow him. Judge Marcus Holloway wasn't just any homeowner. He wasn't just any man being questioned in his yard. He was a respected federal judge with decades of experience inside the justice system. He had presided over major cases, issued rulings that shaped lives, and upheld the very laws this officer was sworn to protect. But standing there in his backyard, none of that seemed to matter. To the officer, all he saw was someone who, in his mind, didn't belong. And that single assumption would set off a chain of events that neither of them could undo. To understand how this confrontation even happened, you have to rewind a few hours earlier, before the officer ever stepped foot into Judge Marcus Holloway's backyard. The neighborhood where Judge Holloway lived was known for its quiet reputation. Wide streets, manicured lawns, large homes with long driveways. Most of the residents had lived there for years, some for decades. They waved politely, attended the same community events, and rarely felt the need to lock their doors during the day. Judge Holloway had lived on that street for over a decade. He bought the house with money he earned through years of public service. His neighbors knew him. They had spoken with him at barbecues, exchanged greetings during evening walks, and watched their children grow up alongside his. To them, he wasn't suspicious, he was familiar. But not everyone in the neighborhood shared that history. A new resident had moved in several months earlier, just a few houses down. She didn't know Judge Holloway. She hadn't spoken to him. Her understanding of the neighborhood came mostly from what she saw through her windows and what she assumed based on appearances. That afternoon, she noticed something that immediately unsettled her. From her vantage point, she saw a man in the backyard of a home she believed was empty. She hadn't seen a familiar car in the driveway recently. She didn't recognize the man, and instead of questioning her assumptions, she picked up her phone. She called the police. On the line with the dispatcher, she described what she claimed was suspicious behavior. She said the man appeared to be lingering in the backyard. She suggested he might be checking the property. She implied he didn't belong there. What she didn't say was just as important as what she did. She didn't say he was breaking anything. She didn't say he was carrying tools. She didn't say he was trying to enter the house. She simply described a man who looked out of place to her. The call was logged, categorized as a possible trespassing situation, and dispatched without much scrutiny. That was all it took. Officer Daniel Reeves was assigned to respond. Officer Reeves had been with the department for several years. His record wasn't spotless, but it wasn't clean either. There had been complaints in the past, concerns about his tone during stops, about the way he spoke to certain people, but none of them had resulted in serious consequences. A warning here, a brief training session there. Nothing that slowed his career. When he arrived at the address, he didn't park and approach the front door like protocol suggested. He didn't knock. He didn't call out. Instead, he walked straight toward the side of the property. The gate was unlocked, so he opened it. Without a warrant, without consent, without confirming anything. That decision, small in the moment, would later become one of the most damaging choices of his career. As Officer Reeves walked into the backyard, his body camera was already recording. The footage showed a calm scene at first. Birds in the distance, sunlight filtering through trees, water hitting the soil. It looked like any ordinary day. Then Judge Holloway came into view. He was standing near the plants, holding a hose, focused on his yard. He looked up as the officer entered his space, confusion written plainly across his face. He hadn't called the police. He wasn't expecting anyone, and he had no idea why an armed officer was suddenly on his property. Officer Reeves didn't ask questions to understand. He didn't pause to assess the situation calmly. Instead, he immediately placed his hand near his weapon and raised his voice. That was the moment everything shifted. Because from that point forward, the encounter stopped being about a suspicious person and became something else entirely. And the camera never stopped rolling. The moment Officer Reeves placed his hand near his weapon, the tone of the encounter changed completely. Judge Marcus Holloway noticed it immediately. He had spent his entire professional life around law enforcement officers, attorneys, and courtroom proceedings. He understood body language. He understood escalation. And he understood how quickly situations like this could spiral out of control if handled poorly. That was why he stayed calm. He lowered the hose slowly and set it on the ground, making no sudden movements. His hands remained visible, exactly where the officer could see them. He wasn't trying to challenge authority. He was trying to survive an encounter that already felt wrong. Officer Reeves didn't acknowledge the cooperation. Instead, he narrowed his eyes and asked again what Judge Holloway was doing there, as if the answer hadn't already been given. "This is my house," Judge Holloway repeated. "I live here." The officer looked around the yard, then back at the man in front of him. The silence stretched for a moment too long. When he finally spoke, his words carried an edge that would later define the entire case. "This house doesn't match you," he said. "You fit a certain profile." There it was. Not a question, not a clarification, an assumption. The implication was clear enough that it didn't need to be spelled out. A man who looked like Judge Holloway, in the officer's mind, didn't belong in a home like this. And that belief shaped every decision that followed. Judge Holloway felt the weight of the statement, but he didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult the officer. He didn't react emotionally. Instead, he asked a simple question. "Do you have a warrant?" Officer Reeves scoffed. "I don't need one," he replied. "I'm responding to a call about a possible break-in." Judge Holloway shook his head slowly. "There is no break-in. I'm the homeowner." He offered to show identification. He explained that his wallet was inside the house and that he could retrieve it if the officer allowed him to. It was a reasonable solution, one that could have ended the encounter peacefully within minutes. Officer Reeves rejected it. Instead, he raised his voice. "Get on the ground." The command hung in the air, heavy and unnecessary. Judge Holloway didn't move. Not out of defiance, but out of principle. He knew the law. He knew he had not committed a crime. And he knew that ordering a man to the ground in his own backyard, without probable cause, crossed a serious legal line. Still, he remained composed. "I've done nothing wrong," he said evenly. "I'm standing on my own property." Officer Reeves accused him of being uncooperative. He suggested that people like you always have a story. He implied that compliance meant obedience, not legality. Every word was captured by the body camera. At that moment, the situation drew attention. Across the street, a neighbor heard the raised voices. He looked outside and immediately recognized what was happening. He knew Judge Holloway well. They had lived near each other for years. Their families had shared meals. There was no question in his mind about who owned the house. The neighbor rushed toward the fence. "Officer," he shouted. "That man lives there. You've got the wrong idea." Officer Reeves turned toward him, irritation clear on his face. "Stay back," he ordered. The neighbor didn't back down. He repeated himself, louder this time, insisting that Judge Holloway was the homeowner and that the officer was making a mistake. For a brief moment, doubt flickered across Officer Reeves's face. But instead of de-escalating, he doubled down. He turned back to Judge Holloway and said he still needed to verify his identity. He insisted they move to the front of the house. Judge Holloway agreed, not because he had to, but because he knew where this was going. And he knew the truth would soon be impossible to ignore. Judge Marcus Holloway walked slowly toward the front of the house, his movements deliberate and measured. His hands remained visible the entire time. Officer Reeves followed closely behind, his posture rigid, his attention fixed as though he still expected something to go wrong. To anyone watching, it was an unsettling sight. A man being escorted across his own property, treated like a suspect, despite doing nothing more than standing in his backyard. And yet, Judge Holloway remained calm. He knew that anger would only be used against him. He knew restraint was his strongest defense. When they reached the front door, Judge Holloway stopped. He reached into his pocket slowly, announcing every movement before he made it. He pulled out his keys and held them up so the officer could clearly see them. "These are my keys," he said. "I'm going to unlock the door now." Officer Reeves said nothing. Judge Holloway unlocked the door and pushed it open. He stepped aside, allowing the officer a clear view inside the home. What Officer Reeves saw next immediately disrupted the narrative he had built in his head. The walls were lined with framed photographs, formal portraits, award plaques, certificates. One image showed Judge Holloway standing beside high-ranking officials. Another captured him at a formal judicial event. A framed appointment document hung prominently near the entrance. The officer froze. The body camera recorded the moment perfectly. The subtle shift in posture, the sudden stillness, the hesitation that hadn't existed before. Judge Holloway turned to face him. "I am Judge Marcus Holloway," he said clearly. "I serve in the federal judiciary." The words landed heavily. For several seconds, Officer Reeves didn't respond. His hand slowly dropped away from his weapon. His breathing changed. The confidence that had fueled his authority just moments earlier drained from his expression. Then Judge Holloway delivered the final blow. "Everything you've said today has been recorded on your body camera," he continued. "And I will be filing a formal complaint before this day is over." Silence filled the space between them. The officer took a small step back. What had started as a routine call, one driven by assumption and unchecked bias, had now turned into a career-threatening situation. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and Officer Reeves knew it. Judge Holloway asked for the officer's name and badge number. This time, there was no resistance. Officer Reeves provided the information quietly, without argument. Judge Holloway then asked if a supervisor was on duty. "Yes," the officer replied. "Call them," Judge Holloway said. Now, the request wasn't angry. It wasn't dramatic. It was procedural, and that made it even more serious. While they waited, Officer Reeves stood off to the side, no longer issuing commands, no longer asserting control. The man he had treated as a threat just minutes earlier now stood firmly in his own home, composed and unshaken. When the supervisor arrived, everything changed again. The moment the supervisor realized who he was speaking to, the tone shifted instantly. His posture straightened. His voice softened. His face paled as the reality of the situation sank in. He apologized. Not once, but repeatedly. He assured Judge Holloway that the incident would be reviewed immediately and thoroughly. He promised accountability. Judge Holloway listened calmly, then responded with precision. He explained exactly what had happened. He described the unlawful entry. He detailed the assumptions, the language, the threats. He made it clear that this was not a misunderstanding. It was a violation of his rights. The supervisor nodded, understanding the gravity of what he was hearing. Officer Reeves was told to return to his vehicle. He left without saying another word. But this incident wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. Within hours of the encounter, Judge Marcus Holloway formally requested the body camera footage. He didn't hesitate. He didn't wait. He knew exactly how these situations could be minimized or reframed if evidence wasn't secured immediately. The request was processed quickly. What the footage revealed left little room for interpretation. It showed the officer entering private property without a warrant. It captured the tone of suspicion from the very first words spoken. It recorded every assumption, every coded remark, every escalation that never should have happened. There was no yelling from Judge Holloway, no resistance, no aggression, just compliance, clarity, and restraint. The footage spread rapidly through internal channels first. Supervisors reviewed it frame by frame. Legal advisors weighed in. Internal Affairs opened a full investigation within days. But it didn't stay internal for long. Once the existence of the footage became known, public pressure began to mount. Advocacy groups demanded transparency. Legal experts commented on the clear violations of constitutional rights. Community leaders asked a simple but powerful question. What would have happened if the man in that backyard hadn't been a judge? The department placed Officer Reeves on administrative leave while the investigation continued. His previous complaints were pulled and re-examined. Patterns that had once been dismissed now carried new weight. Witnesses were interviewed. The neighbor who intervened gave a detailed statement. The woman who made the original call was questioned. She insisted she had simply been concerned. She said she never meant for things to escalate. But critics pointed out what couldn't be ignored. Nothing she described actually indicated a crime. Public reaction intensified. People were outraged, not just because of what happened, but because of how common it felt. Many saw their own experiences reflected in Judge Holloway's story. The body camera had done what words alone never could. It removed doubt. Social media exploded with discussion. News outlets began covering the story. Calls for accountability grew louder each day. Some demanded immediate termination. Others pushed for criminal charges. Legal analysts debated civil rights violations and departmental responsibility. The police department found itself under intense scrutiny. After weeks of investigation, the findings were released. The report concluded that Officer Reeves had violated multiple department policies. He had unlawfully entered private property. He failed to de-escalate. He used language that reflected bias. He ignored a credible witness who confirmed the homeowner's identity. The conclusion was clear. Discipline was unavoidable. But what happened next sparked a new debate. When the investigation concluded, the recommendation against Officer Reeves was severe. The findings left little doubt that his actions were unjustified, unlawful, and driven by bias rather than evidence. For many watching the case unfold, the outcome seemed obvious. He should be fired. But law enforcement discipline is rarely that simple. Behind closed doors, negotiations began. Police union representatives stepped in, citing contracts, due process protections, and precedent. They argued that Officer Reeves had been responding to a call, even if his response was flawed. They claimed termination would set a dangerous standard. City officials disagreed, but they also understood the legal battle that would follow if they pushed too hard. In the end, a compromise was reached. Officer Reeves would not return to patrol duty. Ever. His badge would no longer place him in contact with civilians. He would be removed from the field entirely and reassigned to a non-public administrative role, far from neighborhoods, far from authority on the street. But that wasn't all. As part of the disciplinary agreement, Officer Reeves was ordered to complete 3 full years of mandatory sensitivity and bias training. Not a workshop, not a seminar, not a one-time lecture. 3 years. He would attend ongoing training sessions led by certified specialists. He would be required to submit written reflections, undergo evaluations, and demonstrate measurable progress. Any failure to comply would result in immediate termination. His career, as he had known it, was over. The announcement triggered mixed reactions. Some people felt the punishment didn't go far enough. They argued that trespassing, intimidation, and discrimination should result in termination, or worse. Others believed the decision represented rare accountability in a system where officers often faced none. Judge Marcus Holloway released a brief public statement soon after the decision. He didn't celebrate the outcome. He didn't demand harsher punishment. Instead, he focused on the larger issue. He explained that what happened to him wasn't unique. That countless people experienced similar encounters without cameras, witnesses, or professional titles to protect them. He emphasized that accountability mattered, but so did systemic change. His message was clear. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reform. Officer Reeves offered no public apology. He gave no interviews. He quietly accepted the reassignment and began the training program under strict oversight. And while the headlines eventually faded, the impact of the case did not. Officer Daniel Reeves began his 3-year sensitivity and bias training without any public acknowledgement. There were no interviews, no apologies, no attempts to explain his actions. His departure from active policing happened quietly, without ceremony or recognition. The officer who once walked into a man's backyard with authority now spent his days behind a desk, removed from the streets, removed from direct power over civilians. For the next 3 years, his professional life would be defined by mandatory training sessions, written evaluations, and constant oversight. The badge that once gave him confidence was no longer a symbol of authority in the public eye. His career did not end in a dramatic firing or a courtroom verdict. Instead, it ended slowly, through accountability, supervision, and lessons that should have been learned long before that afternoon. Justice, in this case, did not arrive in the form of handcuffs or prison bars. It arrived through consequences that reshaped a career, through a badge taken off the street, through authority stripped of its reach. And above all, justice came through truth. The body camera never lied. It recorded every word spoken, every assumption made, and every moment of bias that could have been denied if the footage did not exist. Without that camera, the story could have been dismissed, minimized, or forgotten. With it, the truth stood undeniable. Because of that footage, Judge Marcus Holloway, who had been treated like a criminal in his own backyard, was able to prove exactly what happened. Not through anger, not through force, but through evidence. If you've made it to the end of this story, thank you for listening. Stories like this matter because they reveal how quickly power can be misused and how important accountability truly is. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. There are more stories like this waiting to be told. Stories that demand attention. Stories that demand truth. Until next time.